Okay, so this underpainting is dry. It's not coming off when I rub my fingers over it. I'm using gloves in a bottle, by the way, so it'll kind of make cleaning up a little bit easier. And I do have this little dispenser down here for hand wipes, but I try not to use those too much, just mostly with the paper towels. When I'm home painting, if I can find them and if I have some, I'll wear nitrile gloves when I'm painting just to make it even easier. But when I'm doing plein air, that's just one more thing to have to keep up with. So, all right, so let me just kind of, what I normally do at this point is try to select from my palette what I think I'm gonna need. And so it's just kind of a hunting and pecking kind of thing. Seeing what might work in certain areas. There's a little bit of a bluish green cast. That's probably a little too dark with these back trees. I really don't want to draw much attention to them. They are catching some light. That's way too dark. That's too dark. Let's go lighter blue-green. Let's maybe see about that. That's pretty dark too. Well, that's all right. We can layer over it. Maybe some lighter kind of grayed down violet will help. Actually, that's kind of probably what I'm looking for. Much closer to it. I just want to hang on to that, put that over in this tray off to the side. Have a really nice pale green on this grass back here. I think that's a good start. Keep that one out. This bit of shadow here, and I'll from time to time put the photo up so you can kind of refer back to it. That's honestly pretty dark, and I kind of like that dark bluish shadow it's casting. It may be a little too dark, but it's a good shadow color. I'll hang on to that. And then this little band of light, there's some still little bits of shadow here, but overall that's a lighter area. But it's not quite as light as that, so and it's a little greener, right? It's a little bit closer. It's maybe a little too green. Maybe something more here. Yeah, and there's a little, I don't know, it's a much darker version than that, but let me hang on to that. Again, I'll layer some things here and there. This is a lot of kind of dark greenish brown. Some of the leaves that are on those smaller bushes are starting to die off, but I might for now just scumble in a little bit of this warmer dark green, because there's some warmth back there. It's not all dead and weeds yet. I'm going to resist coming up here for just a little bit longer. Some of these leaves up in here, they're really starting to fall, as one might expect in early November. But they're little bits of yellow and gold and a little bit even some red. So I'm just going to think about sort of the average, and they're in front. They're catching a little bit of the light. Again, I'm just kind of trying to feel my way into it. And that's kind of a good average value. I'm going to hang on to that. That might work up in there, and even just a little down here later, just to indicate where some of those leaves are catching a little bit of light. There's actually this tree in front and then this tree behind before we get to this tree line back here. And this is certainly a bit darker and duller. So let me think about what might work there. And actually that might be a good start. Just a really dull violet. Again, the focus is on this, foremost tree, and I want this tree behind it and this tree line in the distance really to kind of fade back. So probably work a little more green into that, just so there's a little contrast between something a little warmer and a little cooler. So hang on to that. That'll work for now, at least. And I think for this shadow here, actually let me pull this back here. A little duller than I want, but I kind of like that. Again, I don't want to get too rowdy with the color, right? Because I want these leaves here to really stand out once we put them in. I think something a little more violet for this foreground shadow. It'll be a little more vibrant, a little more saturated in color than this mid-ground shadow. So maybe something like this. Again, just as a place to get started. I'm using a really light touch, some really nice strips down here from the underpainting that I kind of want to leave. It's just some interesting little bit of detail that might suggest some grass shapes that I don't have to do anything with anymore to achieve, as long as I don't cover them up. So I kind of like that. And usually shadows that are closer to us are darker and deeper than shadows that are further away. But honestly, in this scene in front of me, and Dylan, I don't know if this might be if you could maybe swing over just a little bit to show this. That distant shadow looks quite a bit darker because there's more light coming through the branches on this tree that's casting this shadow right here. And I kind of like that. And I'll probably break this shadow up here a little bit with a little bit of light, right? Similar to how we'll put sky holes in trees. I don't know, is this a ground hole? I don't know what to call it, but that's sort of making this shadow in the foreground a little bit lighter. And so I think that's all right, that the one in the distance is a little bit darker in this case. So, but for now, I think it's a good start. It's kind of a blue-violet that I think will work well. Again, just thinking ahead to quite a bit of yellow and gold that'll be up here. And so that blue-violet will be a nice contrast to that. Okay. So I'm going to go to the background again. I'm going to try to get a little more of this in. Again, I don't intend to do very much at all with this background tree line. And I do want to leave, obviously, throughout some of this underpainting there. I'm trying to use a really light touch. I don't want to cover up the underpainting. I like that little bit of light showing through. And in fact, there's some trees back there that you can see through. I might darken a little bit of this just so I can play with this effect. There are a few tree limbs back there, some tree trunks you can just barely see in the distance. So I might just take the edge of this pastel and kind of roll it along to make some broken lines. I don't want a lot of detail back there, but just enough to suggest what's going on. And there's some bushes in front of those trees, so I might take this same darker value and put a little of that in. Still, overall, that's a pretty light value. I'm just trying to not have too much contrast because that's not really where I want my viewer's eye to go. Right? Come back to this distant grass. That other green, now that I'm thinking about it, needs a little more saturation to it. So I'm going to scumble a little bit of a somewhat brighter green over it. And then maybe come back with that lighter green initially. Just let it barely skip over. Again, I just want to suggest a little bit of extra light hitting those grasses, but I still don't want to cover the underpainting, so. Okay, and that's kind of, there's not much contrast to this sort of tree that's sticking out here a little bit, so let's go back to that. I'm gonna go into kind of maybe a more kind of an umber, something a little bit brighter. I can kind of indicate where that might be peeking through. Let's see about that. Don't want too much attention back there, but I like this idea of layers. This is probably way too much, but I'm gonna, actually that's pretty good. I kind of like that little bit of greenish gold just for some highlight. Okay. Maybe some of this same umber up here. Some of these leaves are catching a little more light. It's not total shadow. And again, I'm going to try to leave a lot of this underpainting showing through just to suggest the depth back in this grove of trees. But especially toward the top, they're catching a little more light. So let's move some of that in. Make sure that this color is appearing somewhere else instead of just in that one place. So yeah, I'm kind of, I think Aaron Scher puts it this way, just kind of sneaking up on the idea of it, which is a great way to think about it. Put a little more light on some of these trees. Tree trunks, some of these tree trunks are catching a little bit of light. One in particular, and it's kind of this branch right in here. This trunk is catching a little bit of light. And so while I see it before it changes, I'm gonna sneak it in. Okay. That's where it gets a little worrisome potentially. Because I want this yellow to be bright, but I don't want it to be garish, right? I don't want it to look too fake, which is really easy to do with fall foliage. And actually in some of the shadows look a little yellow greenish to me, which makes sense because these are leaves that have not too many weeks ago started turning more green than yellow. So I'm gonna be quite dark enough. I'm gonna put a little green in as the shadow color, and let's just see how that works. And if it doesn't work too well, then I'll do something else, right? It's pastel, you can easily make those kind of changes. Put a little green in here. Not much, just a little bit. Actually kind of like the same green maybe to bring into the shadow a little bit, just to indicate where some light is coming through. That's nice, it's about the same value. And of course, remember to step back. Every few marks, I try to step back a foot or two and just get a sense of what it looks like. I don't know if I like that. That doesn't feel quite right to me. Let's do something different. I'm trying to remember to squint too. Maybe it's this. Let's go with that. It's a little less saturated than what I had before. I'm going to drag a little bit of it over here too. I really want a sort of soft boundary between the light and the shadow. I don't want any abrupt shifts. So I'll drag a little bit of the light over the shadow even, just to sort of soften that transition. And there is a little bit of a line here, and I'm hoping to bring out these leaves that'll come forward a little bit and let what's going to be a little more in the shadow here, although as the sun's moving, it's getting lighter and lighter. So I'll have to remember not to chase the light too much. I'll admit I can get pretty bad at that, which then just makes me really frustrated. So I'm going to try not to do that today. Okay. Let's just go for it. Trying to decide which of these yellows, orangey yellows I want. And sometimes you just have to put it on to find out. It's really, I mean, you know, this is one of those pastels. It's a little dirty. Let me clean it off. See if you can see it a little better. I mean, when else are you going to use that color, right? If you're more of a landscape painter, not painting a lot of still life, and I tend to paint mostly landscape, there are a few times a year when I can use a color like this and get away with it. And maybe because I don't use it all that often, I get a little nervous when it's time to use it. So, but I kind of feel like that's a good start. This is a pretty bright tree. And there's a little bit of a greenish tint to this, to these leaves. I think that's pretty close. Things get a little more orange over here, so I'm going to shift to about the same value, a little more orange. Scumble that in a little bit here and there. Again, I'm not making leaf shapes. I'm just thinking about masses of leaves that all together form a shape, and where that shape lives in this plane, in this picture plane. And see, it's scumbling over some of that umber I put down earlier, some of that green I put down earlier. And I'm really happy with how that looks. Just a nice subtle transition, and I hope gives you the impression of those leaves that were green now darkening up a little bit, some that are already dying off but haven't fallen yet, some that are a little red, and then some that are still that really nice color. In fact, I'm going to drag a little bit of that over this yellow too. I almost like this orangey color a little bit better. It sort of settles it down a little bit. I'm liking that. Let's bring some of that over here. Again, I'm not covering up. I don't want to lose that violet underpainting because that's really doing a lot for me at the moment. There's a drip right here that's already looking like a tree trunk. And if I wanted to, I could just take this pastel, this darker pastel, and come in and fill that in a little bit. Just follow where that drip was. It gives me a really natural spot for a little bit of a tree trunk showing through. And I can come back and maybe give that a little darker side over here. Remember that even as the light's coming through these trees, that the trunks and the limbs also are getting some sun, which means they've got some shadow on one side as well. So I'm kind of closing in on the block end. Let's just take this another minute or so, kind of finish filling in some of these areas. I don't want really bright areas around the edges of the painting. So I'll kind of keep those lighter colors right through here. And in fact, before I lose it, before the light changes, I really do want to go through and emphasize sort of this kind of bit of an S shape. So I'm going to press down just a little harder in a few areas and start to get a little more definitive with these leaf shapes. Kind of make sure I have that section locked in a little bit. And then right here, you've got, and I'm just letting my pastel skip a little bit to give some indications of a few more specific leaf shapes, because I really, again, want this to kind of be my focal point. So I'll eventually have a little more detail here. I don't want to do too much yet, but I want to remember that that's what's going on here, so I'll put a little more detail right there. All right, I'm going to stop for a minute, reevaluate, and then we'll finish it up after this.